I wanted to make a few comments about the game in Modern War #2 called Oil War Iran Strikes. The first thing is the sequence of play is kind of interesting. The Iranian players first because they're the attacker, but what they have to begin with is a combined movement phase. So the Iranian side's made up of a number of factions, and they can all move at the same time. However, after movement's done, they go to the combat phase, and that's broken up. So the first combat phase is the Iranian Basij combat phase. So the Basij forces can fight and make any attacks, but they can't combine with any of the other factions. They have to do their fighting individually, only combining with each other. Then after that combat phase, there's a second combat phase, and this is when the Iranian Artesh and the Revolutionary Guard Corps and even Iraqi insurgents that have gone to the Iranian side, these can combine together in combats, but not with the Basij. So that's kind of an interesting way to show some limitations in the cooperation on the Iranian side. Then in the US and coalition side, you have another similar thing. You have the first movement phase is the non-US coalition movement, and then they get to combat. Then you can have a US movement phase or a combat phase or an air power phase. You get to pick. And then whichever ones you didn't pick, you can now pick of the two left to be your next phase, and then you can pick the last one for your last phase. So it's kind of an interesting division of activity. And the Americans obviously have the most flexibility. Then there's a random events phase that comes late in the turn, which I find unusual. Usually they're at the beginning of a turn. And one of the problems this caused me is sometimes I would forget to implement the reinforcement. If I waited and started the next turn a little bit later, I'd forget about it. And then the final phase in the game is the mutual replacement and reinforcement phase. And they all have a little bit different ways that they conduct this. The Iranian Basij have a replacement phase, and then there's a strategic reserve release phase where troops that are in there can be released. There's a Saudi reinforcement step, and then there's a US reinforcement step. So these are just some of the interesting thoughts about the sequence of play in this game. And I believe there are 10 turns in the game. I also wanted to comment on the random events that can occur in this game. The phase, as I already said, is later in the turn. And the events are on a bell curve. So you roll 2d6 and you get anywhere between a 2 and a 12. Obviously, a 7 comes up the most often. And so, that is a very generic event called Sandstorm, which, the main danger for that is the Iranian player can put the sandstorm marker somewhere in Saudi Arabia and slow down American movement with that. But there are a couple of rare events that are on the end of the bell curve. And one is if you roll Snake Eyes, an interesting event happens, and that is Syria enters the war. And it does so on the side of Iran against the rest of the Persian Gulf nationalities. So that is a very rare event that would only happen on a roll of a Snake Eyes, but you do roll the dice every turn for 10 turns. So it could conceivably come up. So that's one of the rare ones. Another rare event too, on a roll of a 3, is if the UN calls on Iran to cease aggression. So and all that it's not a big event. It's not like you have to stop and you lose. Basically, for one turn, Iran has to, if he accepts this, he can't attack for one turn. That is a disadvantage, obviously, since the burden of proof is on him. He's got to capture at least 4 victory points worth of major cities to win the game. But if what's written in here is that whatever the negotiations happen for that one turn are going to break down, and Iran will go back to attacking the next turn. So if Iran decides, no, I'm not going to listen to the UN and wants to continue to attack, what ends up happening as a punishment for that is that the number of victory points that they need to win increases. So at the beginning of the game, it starts at a 4. They need 4 victory points to win. If they refuse to cease aggression for one turn at the behest of the UN, well, then they're going to need 5 victory points to win. So that's one of the rare events. The other ones are fairly common, but I did want to comment on 2 more rare events. If you roll an 11, which is not a very likely, a man appears claiming to be the 12th Imam. So yes, Muhammad has come back for his 12th and final time. And what does that do? Well, the Iranians can proclaim a jihad, and in the coming turn, they're going to get major combat advantages. This event can only be rolled once a game, so if you roll an 11 on another events phase, it counts as no event. But it's kind of a strange event that a Muhammad figure would appear and have, a morale effect on combat for one turn. But that never came up in my game. So, and another rare event is if you roll a straight 12, it's Turkey enters the war. And so if Turkey enters the war, the U.S. player would roll a die, and on a 1 through a 3, Turkey will enter the war on his side. So if it's a 4 through 6 that's rolled after this, well, there's assumed to be an Islamic revolution has swept through Turkey, and the nation is going to enter the war on the Iranian side. So either way, the Turkish units will come into play in the game, and if it is ever rolled again, it's a no event. I did not have this event happen in my playthrough. Turkey enters the war, but it's interesting. Turkey or Syria can enter the war, and you can have the appearance of the 12th Muhammad. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on those little innovative Chrome factors in this game.